People think money changes your life overnight, but sometimes it changes the people you love even faster. That is the lesson I learned the day my wife won $20 million. Before that day, Lauren and I lived what most people would call an ordinary American life. We were not rich, but we were comfortable. We owned a modest house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. We both worked hard. We paid our bills on time. We planned vacations months in advance and celebrated small victories together. Looking back now, those simple moments feel more valuable than any amount of money. The winning ticket entered our lives on a Friday evening. Lauren stopped at a convenience store on her way home from work and bought a lottery ticket without thinking much about it. The next morning, I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when I heard a scream from the living room. For a split second, I thought something terrible had happened. I rushed in and found Lauren staring at the television with tears running down her face. She pointed at the screen and struggled to speak. Then she handed me the ticket. I checked the numbers once, then twice, then a third time because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. Somehow, against impossible odds, Lauren had won $20 million. For several minutes, we simply stood there in shock. Then we laughed. We hugged. We cried. We called family members. It felt like one of those moments people dream about but never expect to experience. I was genuinely happy for her. I never once thought about what portion belonged to me or how the money might affect my own future. All I cared about was seeing my wife happy. During the first few weeks, everything seemed wonderful. We met with financial advisors. We discussed investments. We talked about helping our parents and creating long-term security. Lauren seemed excited but still grounded. At least that is what I believed. Then small changes started appearing. At first, they were easy to ignore. Lauren began spending more time online researching luxury homes and expensive travel destinations. She started following social media accounts focused on wealthy lifestyles. She became fascinated by stories about celebrities, entrepreneurs, and people who suddenly found themselves living in a completely different world. None of that seemed unusual. After all, most people would probably do the same thing after receiving life-changing money. But the changes continued. Conversations that once felt natural began feeling different. Lauren spoke less about our shared goals and more about her personal plans. She stopped asking for my opinion as often. Decisions we once made together suddenly became decisions she announced after making them alone. One evening, while discussing possible renovations to our house, she casually said something that stayed with me for weeks. "We do not have to think small anymore." The words themselves were harmless, but the way she said them felt strange. As though the life we had built together was somehow beneath her now. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself she was overwhelmed, excited, adjusting to a new reality. Yet deep down, I sensed something changing. The money had not entered our bank account yet, but it was already influencing our marriage. The woman sitting across from me at the dinner table looked exactly like Lauren, yet sometimes it felt as though I was speaking to someone I had never met before. Over the next few months, the excitement surrounding the lottery win slowly transformed into something I struggled to recognize. The money had not changed our address yet, but it was already changing the atmosphere inside our home. Lauren became increasingly interested in a world that had never mattered to her before. Expensive restaurants replaced our favorite local places. Luxury brands suddenly became topics of daily conversation. People she had never mentioned before somehow became important influences in her life. At first, I tried to be supportive. After all, receiving $20 million would be a major adjustment for anyone. I told myself she simply needed time to adapt. But adaptation was not what I was witnessing. It felt more like abandonment. One evening, I came home after work and found Lauren studying photographs of waterfront properties in Florida. Some of the homes cost several $1,000,000. I sat beside her and asked what she was thinking. Without looking away from the screen, she smiled and said, "People like us should aim higher now." The phrase bothered me immediately, not because of the house, because of the words "people like us." It sounded as though she had joined a different group and was inviting me to keep up. During the following weeks, similar comments became more common. She criticized our neighborhood. She mocked our old vacation habits. She started referring to friends we had known for years as people with small ambitions. Each remark seemed minor on its own, yet together they created a growing distance between us. The most painful part was realizing she no longer seemed interested in hearing my perspective. For years, We made decisions together. Now conversations felt one-sided. Lauren announced plans rather than discussing them. She spent hours with financial consultants, lifestyle coaches, and new acquaintances who suddenly appeared after news of the lottery spread. Meanwhile, I continued working my normal schedule and trying to maintain some sense of stability. One Saturday afternoon, we attended a family gathering at her parents' house. Normally, Lauren loved those events. This time, she seemed impatient the entire day. During dinner, one of her cousins joked that she should not forget the rest of us after becoming wealthy. Everyone laughed. Everyone except Lauren. "Trust me," she replied. "My life is going to be very different from now on." The room became noticeably quiet. I saw several relatives exchange uncomfortable looks. Driving home later that evening, I asked if she realized how her comment sounded. Instead of reflecting on it, she became defensive. "People are jealous," she said. "They cannot handle success." That response surprised me. These were family members who genuinely cared about her. Yet she seemed to view every concern as criticism. As summer turned into fall, I noticed another troubling change. Lauren stopped talking about our future and started talking about her future. The difference was subtle but impossible to ignore. The dreams we once shared were gradually being replaced by ambitions that revolved around a single person. Then one night, while sitting across from me at the kitchen table, she looked directly into my eyes and said something that made my stomach tighten. "Sometimes I wonder if winning the lottery happened because life was trying to tell me I deserve more." At that moment, I realized the money was no longer simply affecting our marriage. It was rewriting the way my wife saw herself, and unfortunately, it was rewriting the way she saw me too. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday evening almost 9 months after the lottery win. I came home from work expecting an ordinary night. Instead, I found Lauren sitting at the dining room table with a stack of papers neatly arranged in front of her. The moment I saw her expression, I knew something was wrong. There was no warmth in her eyes, no hesitation, no uncertainty. She looked like someone arriving at a business meeting rather than speaking to her husband. I set my keys on the counter and asked what was going on. Lauren folded her hands and calmly told me to sit down. My stomach tightened immediately. Over the previous months, I had watched our marriage drift further away from the life we once shared. We argued more often. We spent less time together. Yet part of me still believed we could find our way back. That hope disappeared the moment she slid the papers across the table. Divorce documents. For several seconds, I simply stared at them. The words seemed unreal. This was the woman I had built a life with. The woman whose dreams I supported for nearly 2 decades. The woman I stood beside long before there was any lottery ticket. "You are serious?" I finally asked. Lauren leaned back in her chair and nodded. What happened next hurt more than the papers themselves. She smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an uncomfortable smile. A confident smile. Almost amused. "Michael, this is the best decision for both of us," she said. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "For both of us?" I repeated. "Yes," she replied. "We want different things now." The way she said we felt strange because there no longer seemed to be a we. There was only Lauren and whatever future she had imagined for herself. I asked whether there was someone else involved. She immediately said no. I believed her. This was not about another person. It was about money, status, and a completely different view of life. Lauren looked around the house and sighed. "I spent years living a small life," she said. "Now I finally have opportunities most people never get." I listened quietly. The more she spoke, the clearer everything became. She genuinely believed the lottery win had elevated her into a different category of people. She spoke about luxury travel, exclusive communities, investment opportunities, and experiences she wanted to pursue. None of those things were wrong on their own. What hurt was the assumption that I no longer belonged beside her. Then came the sentence I will never forget. "You should probably accept this now because fighting it will only make things harder." Her confidence was impossible to miss. She acted as though the outcome had already been decided, as though I should simply step aside and disappear from the life we built together. I looked down at the documents once more before pushing them back across the table. "I am not interested in a fight," I said calmly. "But I am not going to make decisions tonight either." Lauren laughed softly. The sound surprised me. "Michael, the situation is pretty straightforward." Maybe she believed that. Maybe she assumed the money guaranteed control over everything that followed. But as I stood and walked toward the living room, a strange feeling settled over me. For the first time in months, I was not hurt. I was alert. Because deep down, I suspected there were facts about marriage, law, and fairness that Lauren had never bothered to understand, and eventually reality would speak much louder than $20 million ever could. The following Monday, I scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague at work. Until that point, I had never spoken to a lawyer in my life. I walked into the office carrying a folder filled with financial documents, property records, tax returns, and years of paperwork that represented the life Lauren and I had built together. The attorney, a calm and experienced man named David Reynolds, listened carefully as I explained the situation. I told him about the lottery win, the sudden personality changes, and the divorce papers waiting on my dining room table. He did not interrupt. He simply took notes and asked questions. After nearly an hour, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Michael, I think there are some important facts your wife may not fully understand." Those words immediately caught my attention. For months, Lauren had behaved as though the outcome of the divorce was already decided. She spoke with complete certainty. She acted as though $20 million automatically placed her in control of every future decision. Yet David seemed far less convinced. He began explaining how property division worked, how marital assets were evaluated, and how courts often examined the complete financial history of a marriage. The more he spoke, the more I realized how complicated the situation actually was. The lottery ticket had been purchased during our marriage. The timing of the claim, the management of funds, and various legal details could all become relevant factors. Most importantly, the law focused on facts rather than emotions. It did not care who felt richer or more important. It cared about fairness and legal principles. When the meeting ended, I felt something I had not felt in months. Relief. Not because I expected some miracle outcome, because reality was finally replacing assumptions. As I left the office, David offered one final piece of advice. Do not argue with her. Do not make threats. Stay calm and let the process work. That advice became my strategy. Over the following weeks, Lauren seemed increasingly confident. She met frequently with her attorney, Jennifer Collins. New luxury purchases continued appearing. She talked openly about relocating after the divorce. Sometimes she discussed future plans as though our marriage had already been erased from history. One evening, she casually mentioned a waterfront condominium she wanted to purchase after everything was finalized. "I have already started looking," she said while scrolling through photos on her phone. I simply nodded. The reaction appeared to frustrate her. Perhaps she expected resistance. Perhaps she wanted an argument. Instead, I focused on gathering documents, following legal advice, and maintaining my normal routine. At work, I continued performing well. At home, I remained respectful. The calmer I became, the more impatient Lauren seemed to grow. Then, about 6 weeks before the first court hearing, something unexpected happened. During a discussion with her attorney that I accidentally overheard while passing through the kitchen, Jennifer asked a question that immediately changed Lauren's expression. "Have you considered the possibility that the court may not view this as simply as you do?" For the first time since the divorce papers appeared, I saw uncertainty cross Lauren's face. Only for a moment, but it was there. And something told me that moment would become very important before this story was over. As the court date approached, the atmosphere inside our house became increasingly strange. Lauren behaved as though she was preparing for a celebration rather than a legal proceeding. She spent hours discussing future plans with friends, researching luxury properties, and talking about the opportunities waiting for her once the divorce was finalized. The confidence she displayed never seemed to weaken. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing week. Meanwhile, I followed David Reynolds' advice exactly. I stayed calm. I avoided unnecessary arguments. I gathered documents whenever he requested them and focused on facts rather than emotions. The more information we organized, the clearer the financial history of our marriage became. We had built our life together over nearly 20 years. Every mortgage payment, every savings contribution, every financial decision created a record. The story of our marriage existed not only in memories, but also in paperwork. One afternoon, I met David at his office to review the latest developments. He spread several folders across the conference table and carefully explained what to expect. There were still uncertainties, of course. Court outcomes are never guaranteed. But he seemed increasingly confident that the situation was far more complicated than Lauren believed. People often make the mistake of confusing wealth with leverage, he told me. The court does not reward confidence. It evaluates evidence. Those words stayed with me. Evidence, facts, reality. All three seemed to be missing from many of Lauren's assumptions. A few days later, I witnessed another revealing moment. Lauren was speaking with her attorney on speakerphone while organizing paperwork in the kitchen. I was not trying to listen, but several comments were impossible to ignore. Jennifer Collins repeatedly urged caution. She reminded Lauren that outcomes could vary depending on legal interpretations and financial circumstances. Lauren responded with visible frustration. I won the money, she said. I do not understand why everyone keeps acting like this is complicated. There was a brief silence before Jennifer calmly replied, because it is complicated. For the first time, I sensed tension between them. Lauren wanted certainty. Her attorney kept offering realism. As the hearing moved closer, that gap became increasingly noticeable. Outside the legal process, my own life continued moving forward. Work provided stability. Friends checked in regularly. One evening, I met Rebecca Moore for coffee after work. She had watched the situation unfold from a distance and finally asked how I was holding up. Surprisingly, my answer came easily. Better than I expected. And it was true. Months earlier, the divorce papers felt devastating. Now they felt like part of a process rather than the end of my world. Somewhere along the way, I stopped viewing myself as a victim. I started viewing myself as someone navigating a difficult chapter. That shift changed everything. The night before the first major court appearance, Lauren and I happened to be in the kitchen at the same time. The house felt unusually quiet. She looked at me for several seconds before speaking. Tomorrow should settle everything. Her voice carried the same confidence I had heard for months. I simply nodded. Maybe, I replied. She seemed surprised by my calmness. Perhaps she expected anxiety. Perhaps she expected fear. Instead, I felt something entirely different. Curiosity. Because after months of assumptions, predictions, and declarations, the moment had finally arrived when only one thing would matter. Not money. Not confidence. Not pride. The facts would speak for themselves, and something told me neither of us would leave that courtroom seeing the future quite the way we imagined. The courthouse looked far less dramatic than most people imagine. There were no flashing cameras, no crowds, and no theatrical speeches echoing through hallways. It was simply a building where facts would be examined and decisions would be made. Yet as I walked through the entrance that morning, I knew the outcome could shape the next chapter of my life. Lauren arrived shortly after I did. She looked confident, polished, and completely certain of herself. Her expensive designer outfit seemed carefully chosen for the occasion. Jennifer Collins walked beside her carrying several folders. Across the room, David Reynolds greeted me with a calm nod and a firm handshake. Unlike Lauren, he appeared completely unaffected by the tension surrounding the case. We entered the courtroom and took our seats. As proceedings began, I focused on staying present. David had warned me that emotions often distract people during legal disputes. The goal was not to react. The goal was to listen. Over the next several hours, documents were presented, timelines were reviewed, and financial records were discussed in detail. Much of it sounded technical, but the larger picture gradually became clear. The court was not interested in assumptions. It wanted evidence. It wanted context. It wanted a complete understanding of how our financial life had been built during the marriage. Several times, Lauren appeared frustrated by the pace of the process. She seemed to expect simple answers to complicated questions. Whenever the discussion became more detailed, I noticed Jennifer quietly advising patience. Meanwhile, David methodically presented records showing years of shared financial decisions, joint planning, mortgage payments, retirement contributions, and investments made throughout our marriage. None of it was dramatic. Yet together, those records told a story that could not be ignored. During a break, I stepped into the hallway to get some water. For a moment, I found myself standing near Lauren. We had barely spoken all morning. She looked at me and shook her head slightly. I still do not understand why this is taking so long, she said. Her voice carried genuine frustration. I thought about responding, then simply said, because important decisions usually do. She did not reply. Back inside the courtroom, the discussions continued. At one point, the focus shifted toward the timing of the lottery claim, the management of funds, and the legal framework surrounding assets acquired during the marriage. The details were complex, But one thing became increasingly obvious. The situation was nowhere near as straightforward as Lauren had believed. For the first time since she handed me those divorce papers, I saw uncertainty appear on her face. Not fear, not panic, just uncertainty. The confidence that had defined her attitude for months seemed to weaken slightly each time another question required deeper examination. As the afternoon progressed, Judge Richard Sullivan listened carefully to every argument. He rarely interrupted, but when he did speak, the courtroom became completely silent. His questions were precise, thoughtful, focused entirely on facts. By the end of the day, no final ruling had been issued. Yet something important had already changed. Lauren entered the courtroom expecting confirmation. She left carrying doubt. As we walked toward the parking lot, I noticed she was unusually quiet. For months, she had spoken as though the outcome was guaranteed. Now, for the first time, reality seemed to be challenging that belief. And deep down, I had a feeling that the most important part of this story was still ahead of us. 2 weeks later, we returned to the courthouse for what would become the most important day of the entire case. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from the previous hearing. The early confidence I had seen in Lauren was gone. She still carried herself professionally, but the certainty that once seemed unshakable had faded. Jennifer Collins remained focused and composed, while David Reynolds appeared as calm as ever. As proceedings resumed, Judge Richard Sullivan began reviewing the evidence that had been presented over the previous hearings. The courtroom remained completely silent. Every person in the room seemed to understand that the discussion was moving toward a conclusion. For months, Lauren had viewed the divorce as a simple process. She believed the lottery win had fundamentally changed the balance of power in our marriage. Yet as the judge carefully summarized the facts, a different picture emerged. He spoke about the duration of our marriage. He discussed the financial partnership we had maintained for nearly 2 decades. He referenced records showing years of shared obligations, shared planning, and shared sacrifices. Again and again, he returned to one central idea. Marriage is not merely a collection of individual achievements. It is a legal and financial partnership. Listening to him speak, I realized something important. The courtroom was not focused on the lottery ticket itself. It was focused on the reality of the life that existed before and after that ticket entered our world. Judge Sullivan explained that courts are obligated to evaluate circumstances based on law, evidence, and fairness rather than personal assumptions. Then he turned his attention toward the issue that had driven much of the dispute: the lottery winnings. For months, Lauren had spoken as though the money automatically guaranteed a particular outcome. The judge's analysis made it clear that reality was significantly more complex. He carefully outlined the legal considerations involved and explained why simplistic conclusions often fail when examined under the law. As he spoke, I glanced briefly toward Lauren. Her expression changed with each explanation. The confidence that once filled every conversation was now replaced by careful attention. For perhaps the first time since winning the lottery, she seemed genuinely uncertain about what would happen next. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Judge Sullivan delivered his conclusions regarding the financial matters before the court. He emphasized fairness. He emphasized the length of the marriage. He emphasized the contributions both spouses made throughout the relationship. Most importantly, he rejected the idea that wealth alone should determine outcomes. The courtroom remained completely silent as he finished speaking. No dramatic reactions followed. No one celebrated. No one argued. Yet the impact of his words was impossible to miss. Lauren stared forward quietly. Jennifer leaned toward her and spoke softly. Across the room, David simply nodded. The months of preparation, documentation, and patience had led to this moment. As the hearing concluded, people slowly began gathering their materials. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt something I had not experienced in a very long time. Peace. Not because I had defeated someone. Not because I wanted Lauren to suffer. The peace came from knowing that facts had prevailed over assumptions. Reality had prevailed over arrogance. Outside the courthouse, Lauren stood near the steps while speaking quietly with Jennifer. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. The judge had already said everything that mattered. And for the first time since this entire process began, I sensed that Lauren finally understood something the lottery money had prevented her from seeing for far too long. The weeks following the court's decision felt strangely quiet. For nearly a year, my life had revolved around uncertainty, legal meetings, financial records, and difficult conversations. Suddenly, all of that was over. The divorce process continued through its final administrative stages, but the major questions had already been answered. For the first time in a very long time, I could focus entirely on moving forward. What surprised me most was not the outcome itself. It was Lauren's reaction afterward. In the months leading up to the hearings, she had spoken constantly about her future. New homes, luxury travel, exclusive communities, endless opportunities. Yet after the court proceedings concluded, much of that enthusiasm seemed to disappear. It was not because she lacked financial security. She still had more money than most people could ever imagine. The difference was that reality had interrupted the fantasy she had been building around that money. One afternoon, several weeks after the hearing, Lauren asked if we could meet for coffee. At first, I considered declining. Then I realized there was no reason to avoid the conversation. We met at a small cafe we used to visit years earlier before any of this began. The moment I saw her, I noticed how different she seemed. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had been replaced by something else. Reflection, humility, perhaps even regret. We spoke politely for several minutes. The conversation stayed focused on ordinary topics until Lauren finally addressed what was clearly on her mind. I thought everything would feel different, she admitted quietly. I understood exactly what she meant. For months, she had treated wealth as the answer to every dissatisfaction in her life. Yet now she was discovering something many people learn too late. Money can change circumstances, but it cannot automatically create fulfillment. Lauren stared down at her coffee cup before continuing. I spent so much time chasing what I thought I deserved that I stopped appreciating what I already had. Hearing those words felt surreal. A year earlier, I had tried repeatedly to express similar concerns. Back then, she dismissed them. Now she was arriving at the same conclusion on her own. The difference was that life had become her teacher instead of me. As the conversation continued, she admitted that many relationships formed after the lottery win had proven shallow. Some people were interested in opportunities rather than friendship. Others disappeared once expectations changed. The glamorous future she imagined turned out to be far less satisfying than she expected. I kept thinking the next thing would make me happy, she said. A bigger house, a new experience, another goal. But the feeling never lasted. I listened without judgment. There was no reason to criticize her. Reality had already done that far more effectively than I ever could. Before we left, Lauren looked at me with genuine sadness. I lost sight of who I was, she said. And I lost sight of who you were too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I nodded. It was perhaps the most honest thing she had said since this entire story began. As I drove home afterward, I realized something important. The court ruling had settled the legal questions months earlier, but this conversation settled the emotional ones. Lauren finally understood that the greatest loss in her life was never about money, property, or legal outcomes. It was about allowing success to convince her that the people who loved her mattered less than the lifestyle she imagined waiting on the other side. Several months after my conversation with Lauren at the cafe, the final pieces of our former life settled into place. The legal process was complete. The paperwork was finished. The house had been sold, accounts had been divided according to the court's decisions, and the future that once seemed uncertain had finally become clear. What surprised me most was how little I thought about money anymore. For nearly a year, money had dominated every conversation, every disagreement, and every legal discussion. Yet now, standing on the other side of everything, I understood that the most valuable things in my life had never appeared on a financial statement. Peace of mind, self-respect, genuine friendships, meaningful work. Those were the things that remained when the noise finally disappeared. My career continued moving forward. The promotion I had been working toward became a reality, and with it came new responsibilities and new opportunities. More importantly, I approached life differently. The experience taught me to appreciate stability rather than chase appearances. It taught me to value people based on character rather than status. Most of all, it taught me never to confuse wealth with wisdom. As for Lauren, we spoke occasionally over the following year. The conversations were always respectful. There was no hostility between us. Time had softened many of the emotions that once felt overwhelming. During one of our final conversations, she shared something that stayed with me. She said the biggest lesson of her life was discovering that gratitude is far more valuable than excitement. Excitement fades. Gratitude lasts. Hearing those words, I realized how far she had come from the person who sat across the dining room table holding divorce papers with complete certainty that money had all the answers. Life had humbled both of us, though in very different ways. Looking back now, I do not view this story as one about winning or losing. The court ruled on legal matters, but life delivered lessons that no judge could teach. Lauren learned that success without appreciation can leave a person feeling emptier than before. I learned that self-worth should never depend on another person's opinion. We both paid a price for those lessons, but perhaps some lessons can only be learned through experience. If someone had told me years ago that the most difficult chapter of my marriage would eventually become one of the most important chapters of my life, I would not have believed them. Yet that is exactly what happened. Sometimes what feels like the end of your story is actually the beginning of a better one. Sometimes disappointment creates space for growth. Sometimes losing the future you expected allows you to build a future you never imagined. And sometimes the greatest victory is not winning a legal battle or proving someone wrong. It is walking away with your dignity intact and your peace restored. As I finish sharing this journey, I would love to know your thoughts. If you were in Michael's position, how would you have responded when Lauren filed for divorce after her life-changing lottery win? Do you believe money reveals who people truly are? Or do you think it simply amplifies qualities that already exist? Share your perspective in the comments. And if stories about resilience, relationships, life lessons, and personal growth resonate with you, consider subscribing and joining us for more unforgettable journeys in the future.